Apple just wrapped up WWDC, and that means we have new web pages to take inspiration from. Something that caught my eye were these info cards that animate to reveal additional details. So, of course, I had to go ahead and recreate this, so today we're going to do that using Framer Motion. To follow along, you can grab the starter code in the description. With that, let's jump in. Alright, so to start, I have this simple next.js project with Framer Motion installed. So far, I just have a section with a styled h1 tag. Let's start by getting a basic version of the card to show up on screen. So I'll create a new file to house this component. First, I'll make a components folder. And then in here, let's call it info card.tsx. Create a new functional component. And immediately, let me just throw this into this section under the h1, info card. Then this info card, let's do some styling on this container div. So we have position relative. We get a fixed height of 800 pixels. BG of white, rounded 3XL, a horizontal padding of 8, and a top padding of 8. Overflow hidden, flex call, and gap of 2. Okay, so we have a basic construct of a card. Then let's replace this info card first with an h2. And this h2, I'll give it position relative, text XL, font medium, and a z index of 50. And I'm just going to copy in some example text here for the h2. Then under this, I'll go to the p tag, give it some styles of text large and font medium. Copy in some more placeholder text. Now this header, I'm going to give it the same teal color here as this password. So let me just go copy this hex code, put it on this header. Now back here in the main page, instead of having this take the full width, I'm going to apply a grid layout and have this be 2 columns. So under this h1, let me add a div, and this info card will sit in the div. And on this div, I'll give it display grid calls 2, gap of 8, and a margin top of 6. And now this takes up half the screen. Now back in the info card component, let's add the toggle button in the bottom right corner. In the same file, I'm just going to create it in a separate component just to make this a little bit more organized. So I'll call it toggle button. And I'll return a button. And this button will have position absolute, right 8, bottom 8. So this will put it in the bottom right hand corner. Size 10, so height and width of 2.5 rem. Rounded full, cursor pointer, flex, justify center and item center to center the content, and a z index of 50 to float it to the top. And let me go ahead and add this toggle button up here so we can start seeing it. And we need to give this a background color so we can actually see it. So let me just add a BG of black. Okay, so now we have this button in the bottom right. Now inside this button, I'm going to go ahead and copy in an SVG. And this is just a plus button. So if I hit save, we won't be able to see it. And that's because we need to set the color of the stroke for this SVG. So I'm going to do it actually here up in the button. So I'm going to give it a stroke of white. So now we can see the SVG in white. Okay, this is a pretty good starting point for this card. Now let's add the detailed content view on top of this card. So again, for this, I'm just going to make a separate component in the same file. Call it detail container. And here I'll return a div, and this div, I'll give it position absolute, inset 0. It'll stretch to all 4 sides. Flex call, justify center and padding of 8. And then inside this div, give it a p tag. And this p tag will give a text white, font medium, text large, max width of 80 characters, and mx of auto. And again, we'll copy in some placeholder text. So now let's add this detail container here up in the card component. Okay, we can't see this right now, and that's because we need to give this div a background color. So I'm going to give it the same background color as this teal. So we'll copy this here onto this div, BG. Right, and now we can see this detail content. Now you'll notice that the H2 up here, we set it to be Z50 so that it could still show up here. But right now we can't see it because it's the same exact color as this background. So if I change this temporarily to white, you can still see it come through. So right now this detail container is just always present, but let's toggle it to show and hide when we click this button. So in the info card component, we'll create a state variable to store this. We'll call it show detail, set show detail. Use state is initially false. Let's import useState. And because we're using useState, we need to make this a client component. Now let's conditionally render this detail container based on the variable. So we'll say show detail if it's true. Then we'll display the detail container. So this appears here. And then on this toggle button, I'll add a onClick. And this will just be set show detail to be the opposite of whatever show detail is. Now, right now, this is throwing an error because it's saying it doesn't know what onClick is. And that's because we need to explicitly have toggle button extend the default button class from HTML. So we'll just go down here. So inside of this, I'll just destructure the props, and this will be of type HTML props of the HTML button element. And then I'll just pass these props into this button tag here. And doesn't like it. Let's change this to HTML attributes instead. Okay, now we're good. And now this onClick is not throwing an error. So let's go ahead and try this. So I click the button, we show the container. If I click it again, it hides the detail content. Right now, there's a lot of hard-coded content here, which is not great. So let's go ahead and make a lot of this content dynamic here through props in the component. So first, let's define what props we need. So up top in the info card, let's define some variables. So we'll want a tint color. So this is what this teal color is right now. And we'll give it a default value in case we don't pass one in. So let's just make it black. We need a title, which is this top text, description, which will be this text below it, which will be empty by default, detail content, which will be what we show in the detail container. We'll take children as well that get passed through as part of the DOM tree. And then we'll just take the remainder default props. And then we need to define types for each of these. So tint color will be an optional string. Title will be a string. Description will be an optional string. Detail content will be an optional string. And we want to combine this as well with the default HTML attributes that we would expect on an HTML div element. Okay, so now let's start using these props. So first in this div, let's just pass through the remainder default props. Then this h2, we'll replace this with title. This p tag we'll replace with the description. We need to change some of these colors as well. So because we can't do fully dynamic tailwind classes, we need to do this in the style tag instead. So here, do style. We'll say the color will be the tint color. Now remove this style here. Now we need to pass through some of these variables into these other components. So in the detail container, we need to pass in the tint color and the content as well. This will be of both type string. And then again, we'll place the content here, like content. And then in this BG, instead of hard coding it, do it in the style tag. Background color, be the tint color. Okay, now let's go ahead and pass it through. So here, tint color will be tint color. And the content will be detail content. So if I try this, if I click it, okay, we have detail content by default black because we haven't passed anything through. Now, one other thing I'm going to add here is if we don't have any detail content, if it's empty, let's just hide this button in the bottom right. So I'm going to create a variable here and we'll call it has detail. And we'll set this to be if the detail content length is greater than 0. So if it's not empty, this will be the Boolean. And then we'll say if we have detail content to show, then we'll actually show this toggle button. So that should make it disappear because by default, the detail content is empty. So now let's go ahead and reflow this content into this component. So in this info card, the tint color will be this teal. The title is the same value, description, and the detail content. All right, so now we go back here and everything here is back to being the same, but now this is a lot more dynamic. Now, the one other thing I'll add is if we do end up passing any content into the info card as children, let's go ahead and just pass it through. So here underneath the paragraph tag, we already destructured children from the props. So we'll just directly pass it through. And let's just put this in a fragment here, otherwise it will complain. And let's actually take advantage of passing through children. So here in this info card, I'm just going to add a basic image here of a blank iPhone. So make a div, give it class name, position relative, size full, max width of 400 pixels, MX auto, margin top of 20. Inside here, I'll use a next image tag, and I'll use it to bring in this iPhone mock.png file, which I've included in the starter code. Alt will be, say, passwords app, give it fill, give it a size property of 50 view height to not bring in a big image. And we'll give it class names of object contain, on larger screens, object cover, and object top. So now that gets passed in, and now we have this blank iPhone screen. And just to take advantage of the flexible component, let's just go ahead and add a second info card here next to it. And maybe let's say here the same tint color, let's change the title. Let's say we don't want a description on this. The detail content will replace. And then here, maybe instead of this image, let's just replace this content, let's say with a different div, class names of widthful, flex1, flex call, justify center. And inside this div, let's just do a p tag with class name text, size 3.5 rem, font medium, leading tight, tracking tight, and let's just copy in some text here. So a different looking card, and click the plus button, still have this detail content show up. Now these cards are looking pretty good, but let's add some animations for when we show and hide this detail content. The key to do this will be to use frame motion variants to define different states of the animations and then to let frame motion animate between those states. So let's start very simply with fading in this detail content instead of just having it pop up. So here in the info card, let's go down into the detail container. Let's first convert this div to be a motion div. Import frame motion, change the ending tag as well. And inside this div, let's configure what we want the initial animate and exit properties to be called. So in this case, we'll say initial is just called initial, animate is animate, exit is exit. And then we'll create a variance object with these keys to define the animation states. So up here, let's just create this. Just create an object called animation variance. And we're going to also add animations to this p tag as well. So I'll make a object called container, which will be for the container variance. Initial will be opacity of 0. Animate will be opacity of 1. Exit will be opacity of 0. A transition, I'll give it a delay value as well here. Let's say of 0.5. And now let's attach these variants to this div. So I'll say variance is animation variance and the container property. Let's try this. If I open this, nicely fades in. The fade out doesn't work. That's because we need to add animate presence here around this. So animate presence around this. And now if we try again, fades in, fades out. I'm also going to add an animation to the p tag here. So let's make this a motion p tag. And because we defined initial animate and exit names in the parent, these automatically get passed into the p tag. So now in this animation variance object, I'll make one for content. And I'll say initially, I want y to be negative 100. So I want it to be a little bit above its normal position, opacity of 0. For animate, I want y to be 0, so back to its intended position. The opacity to be 1. And then for the transition, I'm going to give it a delay of 0.5 and a bounce of 0. And then on exit, the same as the initial values for y and opacity. Now let's attach this to this p tag. So variance will be animation variance, the content. Okay, let's see this. So if I open this, there's that delay that comes in. And then when we go backwards, it goes out first and then we fade out. So the other two things I want to animate here are this title here at the top, which will change colors when the detail content comes through, and also do a small animation for this button. So let's go to the main info cards component, and we'll convert this parent div to be a motion div. Update the closing tag as well. And one thing that you'll immediately notice is there's an error here, and that's because of the prop definitions. So what we need to do is, instead of having this be HTML attributes, HTML div element, I'll change this to a override that Framer Motion provides for HTML motion props. And this will be for the div object. So here I'm going to say initial is false. We don't want this to animate on the initial load. And then for animate, this is where I'm going to have two states I define. One will be called main, which will be the default, and one will be called detail, which is when the detail card is showing. So I'm actually going to define here which state should be active based on, in this case, whether show detail is true or not. So I'll say show detail. If it is true, then the animate state will be called detail. Otherwise, we'll use the main state. And just like before, these values get passed down to all children unless it's overwritten in some way, like we're overriding here in detail container. So now let's add some variants here to this h2 tag. So first, let's make it a motion component. And what we want to animate here is the color of the text. So I'm going to go up here and define the variance object. I'll just call it animation variance here again. And I'll say in the main state, we want the color of the title here to be the tint color, in this case, this teal. And we'll give a transition delay of 0.5. And then when the detail is showing, we want the color to be white. So hash value of white. And then I can attach these variants to this h2 tag. So now let's try it. And before that, let's just remove this style tag here. So now let's try this. If I open the detail, the color nicely animates so I can see it. And if I go back, nicely animates out. So now let's add some animations to this toggle button. So I'm just scroll down to the toggle button. And I'm going to make this, again, a motion button here. Place the closing tag. Again, there's an error here because of the type definitions. So we'll make this HTML motion props for the button element. Let's define the animation variant object. Animation variants. So by default in this main state, we are going to say the rotate will be 0. The background color will be black. And the stroke of the SVG to be white. So exactly as we have it right now. Then in the detail state, we'll rotate by 45 degrees. We'll set the background color to be white. And then for the stroke, we actually want it to become the tint color. Now, we don't actually have the tint color accessible right now in the toggle button. So let's add it. So tint color. And then this will be type string. Now we need to go ahead and pass it in as well. The tint color will be tint color. And now let's attach these variants to the button. So variants will be animation variants. And let's just make sure to remove the default styles. So this background, the stroke color. So now let's try it. If I click the button, it rotates. Click it again, it goes away. There's a little bit of a bounce here, you'll notice, with the rotation animation. I'm going to just get rid of it. So transition, bounce of 0. Click it, and nicely animates between the two states, and it works for each of these cards. Now, I just want to take a moment to quickly show the flexibility that we built into this component and how powerful it is. And by the way, if you want to just play around with this on your own, in the utils folder in the starter code, I've created actually a file with a bunch of data for a couple of different other sections with some additional content, different colors, which you can go ahead and play around with on your own. And so here, what I've just done, just to show you, I've created a section here for Safari. You can see it has a different color. You can see we didn't add or pass in any detail content. So that logic of hiding the button works here. So there's no button. And you can even see down here in this wallet section, I've gone ahead and made a single column grid effectively. You can see the card nicely expands, different type of children content we've added here with text and image side by side, and it works. We can click the button. This detail content still works really well. So it's a really flexible component that you can use in your own projects. So that's what we have for this video. Feel free to drop any questions in the comments. And if you made it this far, I would appreciate a like and subscribe on the channel. And on screen now is another video for you to check out, and I'll see you in the next one.